What is going on, guys? The Champ Strider here, and this is going to be the last tier list you ever have to watch from me, part 1, because, well, we're not going to get any more Chivalry 2 updates, so the meta now is going to be the meta forever, and this isn't a bad thing, because Chivalry does a pretty decent job of weapon balance. So before we hop into it, guys, if you enjoyed the video, be sure to subscribe for more Chivalry 2 and medieval game content. Alright, let's get into it. So to start things off, this list, it's going to be for team objective mode, right? Different attributes in this than in dueling, so the list would obviously be a little bit different. And I'm also going to cater this list to playing against people who are good, right? In normal 64-player team objective, every single weapon in the game is extremely viable. You can jump in with a mallet and absolutely slap a lobby, but that doesn't mean the weapon is good. It just mostly means that the players you're going up against are bad. So we're going to cater this list to if you're playing in a more competitive lobby, whether that be a clan battle, whether it be an event like the War of the Thousands or the Medieval Fighting League that Tournament Ground puts on, or even if you're just going into the server browser where a lot of the high level players, they just like to go rather than stomp pumps, they like to go challenge themselves to play against each other. So it's going to be catered a little bit more to higher level gameplay. And of course, if you disagree with anything, that is what the comment section is for. Just before it happens, I already know there's going to be people who are like, oh, well, I once went 16 and 9 with a glaive. The weapon is really good, man. No, it's not. You're just playing against bad people, all right? So let's get into the list. And I want to start with these two weapons that go in the top tier right here, and that is the two-handed spear and the halberd. And the reason they go straight up there is these are the weapons that in comp matches they tend to have weapon limits, and you can only run 2 of each per team of 32. And the reason for that is these things are oppressive to fight. I'm going to mention this quite a bit, but reach, especially in comp matches, is so important to keep yourself alive and be able to attack people safely from range, because you're not just going to be able to run into a mob of 5 people and survive a 5v1 when everyone else is good. It's not going to happen. So the spear is so strong because you can stay in those back lines as your teammates in fighting and just spam those stabs at enemies who they can't get in range to fight back against you, because of course they have to fight the other 2 people in front of them. So it's just an oppressive weapon that lets you get some shots in for free from a long distance. Super annoying to fight against, and while it tends to be an easier weapon to pick up and play and do well with, if you put it in the hands of someone like Steppo or Banker, it's just pure cancer, and those guys can absolutely stomp with this thing. And the halberd, that would be my preference for one of these limited weapons. And the halberd, very similar, and that has extreme range, except you can spam overheads or stabs, probably more light overheads. But besides that, it's more versatile than the spear in that it is a quality 1vx weapon. While the slashes don't have the range of the overhead or the stab attacks, it does work real nice in a crowd. And I want to say halberd, very underrated when it comes to dragability and swing manipulation. You can do some really nice stuff with this weapon, and it also is really good for some late feints. But yeah, those are probably the 2 most oppressive weapons in the game, so we'll start with them. All right, let's get some axes going here. We'll start with the battle axe. I like to call this thing the maul that can cleave. Battle axe does an insane amount of damage, and it can also cleave through enemies, so it, in theory, is a really good 1vx weapon. In actuality, it's not quite as good in 1vx because what it does lack is that weapon reach that we were talking about, meaning you got to really be close in on your enemies' faces or absolutely surrounded by a mob if you want to get DPS through multiple people. The reach is the only thing that holds this weapon back and makes it not one of the top weapons in team objective. You will see some people use them in comp matches, but the weapon that is used a little bit more if you're going with an axe is, let's see if we can find it here, is this right here, which is the war axe. What the war axe has, it's almost identical to the battle axe, does a little bit less damage, but it has a little bit more reach, meaning you can cleave through more opponents. And it also comes on the Knight Officer, which gives you the war horn. So that's probably the more utilized axe, but both weapons very similar, and a lot of veterans choose to go the war axe specifically for team objective. Extremely good weapons. All right, let's just keep with the axe theme here, and we're gonna put, this will probably surprise some people, in the second tier, the A tier, very good weapons. We're gonna put the Dane axe, and the Dane axe is one of the most popular weapons in Chivalry 2 to stomp shitters, but it's not quite as oppressive in a lobby when you have people who know what they're doing. The majority of vets are not going to fall for swing dodge, swing gamble chuck. So it loses a little bit of its luster when it's fighting against people who can't be cheesed on the Danax's, I guess, I want to say mechanics, but I guess breaking of the game's mechanics because it's a gambler's dream, right? But it can be used extremely well. Someone like Four Eyes, who uses it primarily as a throwing weapon, just snags a ton of free kills with it by chucking it. But again, against better players, while it's still a very good weapon, it doesn't have those higher end drags or swing manipulations that some of the other weapons have, and the animations are a little bit easier to read, and it also lacks in reach. It's closer to the battle axe when it comes to reach wise. So while it is a great weapon, it's not quite your oppressive over tiered weapon. But for the axe that I do think of that, we're going to put this thing up here, and that's the Executioner axe. This is my favorite axe in the game. I think the best axe, and the reason for that is that it has tremendous reach, which is so good for crowd control, and it does good damage. But these weapons that have long range on their slashes and overheads, what you can do is you can drag them through a ton of people in those congested group fights. While you might not get the DPS on one enemy that you would of, say, like a mole or something, what you are sometimes doing is hitting 5 or 6 enemies at a time. So you multiply that DPS, and it's a hell of a lot of damage being thrown. On top of that, it's a great 1vx weapon and has one of the best swing manipulations in the game. I think we've all fought Executioner axes with those real janky long drags. You can go up and down and make them look really, really jank, and that's so good against better players who are going to counter the bread and butter stuff, so you can throw some of that in your gameplay. And those long drags are also good for waiting out someone's active parry, and then once that timer ends, you just catch them with the end of the drag for free damage. And X-Axe is my second comp weapon. You guys will see me switch to that sometimes. In my comp games, I usually go to that when I feel like my team, we're kind of losing the team fights a little bit, and I need a weapon that can have me fight multiple enemies and kill things a little bit quicker than my longsword. But yeah, one of my favorites in the game. All right, let's stop talking about good weapons. And let's talk about some trash weapons. All right, we got the glaive here, and this is Death by 1,000 paper cuts. It's a real weird weapon in that it's super fast. It's like a war club with long range, but actually does less damage. So people will try to say it's a good crowd control weapon, or it's good to, plunk from the back lines. But the question is, why would you ever run this over running a spear or a halberd or any of the other polearm weapons? And the answer is there is no reason to, unless you just want to meme about and have fun in a pub. It just doesn't do the damage to get good players off the table, and you need to kill things in better lobbies, and this doesn't really do that. So again, it's just trash tier weapon. All right, let's go with a quality weapon that also kind of gets in that category of why would you run this over other weapons, and that's the polehammer. Polehammer is a very good blunt weapon with good damage. You can excel it, you can drag it, and it has nice reach, which is also nice. But again, there are blunt weapons that are more meta and are better. And if you're on the Footman, again, the most oppressive weapons in the game are also on the Footman, so you're probably going to want to run them if you're going through the I guess, hard time of being the Footman with the med kits and the band-aids. You're better off being on a different class, running a weapon that is close to the same reach, or a blunt weapon that's just better overall. Good quality weapon, but it's a bit more of a niche pick when it comes to a higher tier lobby. Speaking of middle-of-the-road weapons, we have the probably most oppressive shitter stomper to ever be put in this game, and that is the Highland Sword. This thing, when it released, was absolutely busted. It got nerfed into the ground, and it's been slowly brought back up to a very viable weapon. The name of the game here is all distance control or spacing, because the Highland Sword has tremendous reach, and it also does really, really good damage on those heavy overheads. This thing can absolutely smack. The slash damage, not so good, but it is good for kind of keeping space and, again, raking that DPS through multiple enemies. The thing with this weapon, though, what balances it out and makes it hard to use is that it is extremely, extremely slow, and the recovery time, if you miss a strike, is also extremely long, where you can almost guarantee you're going to get killed in a better lobby, but 3 people will stab you if you miss, right? So this is a good weapon, and there are a few players who've used it well, but it kind of runs in that category of why would you take the Highland Sword, or why would you be a Highland boy over going with something like the Great Sword, which does very similar things without a lot of the weaknesses. So it's a good weapon, but not one of the best. Solid middle of the road one. All right, speaking of middle of the road, let's go with the two-handed hammer, which this is a decent weapon. Blunt weapon, doesn't have the best range, has decent range though, but does good damage, can be dragged kind of funky, can be excelled well. I always like the release of this weapon. I feel like it comes out pretty quick when you excel it. It's a good quality weapon that you don't see too often in the more competitive lobbies because it goes in that category of why would you run this over the heavy mace, which I guess we'll talk about next. But this is like a heavy mace, but just slightly worse. So most people just go Knight Officer with heavy mace. You'll usually only see this when someone wants to run a Vanguard and they either use a Messer or Danax as their main weapon, and they either chuck the Danax or they switch off the Messer when they're fighting a Knight to get that extra bonus damage. And sticking with blunt weapons, let's go right in the S tier to the reason why no one runs the pole hammer or the two-handed hammer, and that is because the heavy mace is one of the best weapons in the game. And you'll see a lot of the top players who play this game favor this weapon. It is that good. It's on the Knight Officer, which means you get access to the Warhorn, and it's a weapon that can go extremely fast with excels, doing nice damage on the slashes and the overheads. But it also can be slowed down tremendously with some really nice drags, does incredible damage on both health and on stamina. And people think this is like a front lines, just like go in there and start causing mayhem weapon, which yes it is, but don't sleep on this weapon's ability to flank enemies, especially in comp where most of the players are on knights, right? If you hit a flank with this where everyone is a knight who's in a melee who's probably damaged, you can just go around one-shotting people left and right before they figure out what's happening. But one of the best weapons in the game, and definitely top tier. All right, let's finish up the blunt weapons with the Maul, one of the most fun weapons to run. And this one's a little bit tough for me to place because it's a weapon that I think when you're running 25 to 32 players on a team in solid lobbies, I think you want one or two players on the Maul, but you don't want a ton of people on the Maul. It's more of a niche specialty weapon than it is something that you would call meta or versatile. It has one-shot potential with the special, which is huge because if you can pick someone off at the beginning of the fight in one shot, you've put your team at such an advantage, especially when all the players in the lobby are good. Blunt weapon, devastating damage, but it also suffers a little bit like the Highland Sword in that it is very slow, so you can get initiative broken or gambled, and it has short range. If you miss, you're probably going to get punished, and on the Vanguard, that means you're probably going to die. I do just want to say on the Maul, we always talk about the drags and the heavies on it, but don't sleep on some of those excelled slashes and overheads. They catch people off guard, and people miss counters and get disarmed by all the stamina damage that they do. All right, and I know someone's going to be in the comments talking some bullshit about this one, how they did good in a pub once, and the quarterstaff. For team objective, especially team objective with good players, it's not a good weapon. Extremely short range on the slashes, better range on the overheads, but it's this weird kind of blunt weapon that doesn't do a ton of damage even on knights, but it's a gambler's dream. It's something like a war club, but it lacks the range and the versatility to be good. There are so many better options that you could take in this game. The redeeming factor about it is its special can be oppressive and really good, but if you want something that cleaves, why not just go with an axe? It's going to be more versatile, and there are more situations where you can take advantage of it. Outside of Sunder using this in comp, I don't think I've ever seen someone really do overly well with one. It's just mostly screw around niche weapon pick. All right, speaking of War Club, we got the gamble stick right here, the two-handed gamble stick, the War Club. One of the most annoying weapons to fight because it can go so fast and it just completely ignores all initiative a lot of the time. But it suffers a little bit like the glaive in that it can be a pea shooter, especially if you're fighting against non-knights. But even against knights, it doesn't do tremendous damage. But it can be used pretty effectively to annoy people and control some distance. Overall, I'd say the lack of ability to 1vx with this weapon and lack of damage means it's a little bit more of a situational pick, and I don't think most people are going to like this in a higher level lobby, but there are players like Pax KC who swears by this and does extremely well on it in pretty much every lobby he's in, so it is definitely viable, but I think it's going to be one of the harder weapons to be effective with. All right, so since we got to do NG weapons, we're going to put the sledgehammer in the C tier. Most NG weapons aren't going to be A tier or S tier weapons, right? Most of the engineers aren't really fighting too much in the better lobbies. They're there to control space and barrier things off, and then kind of protect their barricades until help comes. But the sledgehammer is one of the best weapons on the NG because it does blunt damage, which means it can blow up some knights, and it also can attack pretty fast. The problem with it, again, is incredibly short range, so it has no real 1vx ability. You're gonna have trouble heavy swinging it through multiple people because you hold it so high up on that grip, but it does have some speed and it does have some dragability to it. It can throw people off and be tricky in 1v1 situations, especially when you expect the engineers to be a free kill. So it's one of the better picks. I think it's probably the third best pick on engineer, but it's just decent. So while we're talking about engineer, let's just imagine right in this little spot here, we're going to put the Golden Dag, and in my opinion, best engineer weapon in the game by far, and it would be viable on other classes too. It's that good. I don't see a lot of people running it, but I have seen some of the comp NGs definitely have picked up on this. It's like a maul, but on engineer class. You can slow this weapon down so much with the drags that it'll catch even the most patient counter players because it just takes forever to hit. And it's also got that gimmick where you can use the pierce damage against vanguards and footmen, and then you can use the slashes and overheads against knights and against footmen also for the bonus damage. But it's a great weapon, and I think more people gotta run it. Definitely the best engineer weapon in the game, period. All right, let's clean up the two-handers for engineer. We got the shovel, probably in my opinion the most fun weapon to use in pubs to just screw around, but not the best weapon for comp. Lacks range, lacks damage, does have some tricky overheads and stabs, but not a weapon you're going to want to run to be a main front lines fighter, but great to meme on, and we love the shovel here at the Angels. All right, next let's move up the poleaxe here to the B tier, and the poleaxe is one of the weapons that not too many people run the poleaxe, but the people who do absolutely like swear by the poleaxe. It's like a cult of people, and poleaxe is good. Overheads that you can spam, very similar to like a halberds. They come out real quick and you can just keep throwing them. And then the stabs are very tricky and you can throw some jank with them, kind of looking down and off to the side to drag them in kind of weird, funky looking animations. And it also is great in that the stamina negation means you keep the weapon in your hands usually and win out that stam fight. Weakness of this weapon is not a great 1vx weapon, as the slashes, they have pretty poor range, so you're not going to be able to drag through for a ton of DPS. But the real redeeming factor is while the weapon has decent range in general on the overheads and the stabs, if you use that Q, it has the best special in the game. And this thing is like taking a 3-point shot in basketball. You can hit people from so far. And a lot of times in comp, range is kind of the name of the game. And maintaining range means you're able to stay alive and pull out if you have to. So, solid weapon that you'll usually see 2 or 3 players in a game of 64 people use. And they usually do quite well on it. All right, let's now put the weapon that's probably been the meta since the game has released, and that is the Messer. And the name of the game with the Messer, sorry, I'm losing my voice a little bit, a long video here. The name of the game with the Messer is versatility. It is good at every aspect of the game. 1vx, 1v1, it can be dragged, it can be excelled, right? It's extremely versatile. The animations on it can be disguised so that they look kind of jank. Slashes and overheads, you can make them look like the other one to force enemies to miss counters. And then, of course, I think the best attack on it is that high damage, light overhead, which just kind of spamming that thing through people, you can do a ton of DPS, great attack. And even its stabs, they share the animation with the longsword, which leads to some excellent stab drags, even though they don't do the best damage. But yeah, it's all about versatility weapons. One of the 2 most popular weapons, I would say, in the game, especially from the comp scene. Now, probably the most popular weapon I see in comp games is the Greatsword, and it shares a lot of similar qualities with the Messer in that it's versatile. It's kind of decent at everything, has great range to control distance. The damage on the Greatsword is a little bit more towards the heavy overhead, but that leads into excellent drags with this weapon, especially on those overheads and those toe drags. It does decent damage with the slashes to help control distance with good range, and the stabs, while maybe not as good as the Messers, you can do some real nice stab drags with them. It's a great and versatile weapon that can be slowed down, but but has just enough speed to keep initiative. Again, a great crowd control weapon that leaves you well equipped for almost every situation in the game. So I think that's why it's so popular. Again, versatility is the key here with the greatsword. Now, finishing up swords here, I gotta be a little bit unbiased with my long sword. You guys know that's my go-to weapon, especially in comp, but I do notice not too many people run it in the comp lobbies anymore, and outside of me, I don't see anyone really do well in the fragging department with it in the comp lobby, so, you know, correct me if I'm wrong, but I seem to be one of the only people who's at the top going with the long sword, and I think that's because it kind of lacks damage to put people away, unless you're, of course, stabbing like crazy. Those light stabs are so good on the longsword. That is the attack to key in on. Longsword, I think, in the right player's hand is just completely deadly if you're going to key on what it does well, which is moving to enemy sides and just spamming away those stabs in group fights. To me, it's almost like a cheat in that my team then gets a extra spear because I kind of play it almost like that. But it seems, again, a lot of people don't do well. But it's a pretty versatile weapon, but a little bit more catered to performing stabs and overheads only, and it doesn't have the finishing power that some other weapons do. Like, I don't even worry about kills when I run it. I just try to throw DPS down, just spamming stabs at enemies, moving to their side, trying to get as much damage as I can, and the kills come. But I'm going to put this actually in the A tier. I think at this point in the game's life cycle, you see a lot less people running this in the high tier lobbies. All right, now we have everyone's favorite weapons, and we're going to put them all straight to the trash tier, and that is the bows. I guess they go for a two-handed list, right? But the bows, let's put it this way, okay? If you're in even a server browser lobby, if you check which team has more players on Archer, that team is 90% of the time going to lose. Archery is, you're basically gimping your team. So let's just go over the bows a little bit, okay? The best bow probably is the war bow. And if your name is Brown Superman or Keeper, you could be viable in one of these lobbies on a bow and arrow and have at least a decent influence not to lose the game for your team. If you are not named those people, you're wasting a slot and you need to get in the melee, because when a team has 5 archers against 30 chads, you know that the 25 frontline people are going to get overwhelmed and killed, and then they're going to kill the archers anyway. So unless you're those dudes, don't do it. And then we have the crossbow, which with good use of banner can be somewhat viable, but only if your name is Help Me Stepbo, and of course our good friend Soder Dave. And if you're not named those people, you're also a complete liability to your team. Siege crossbow and regular bow, there is no one that I know who is not a liability to their team, so don't run them. All right, guys, that's where we're going to end our video. I'll be back with part 2 probably next week for one-handed weapons. Again, if you enjoyed the video and you stayed the whole time, be sure to give us that subscription. Champ out.